Okay, so Colossians 3:12 through 14. Now, in Paul's letter to the church at Colossae, Paul is declaring that Jesus is the thing that holds everything together. The theme that Paul is telling the church in Colossae that runs through the gospel, that runs through the Old Testament, that runs through the law is Jesus. And you see that kind of language a lot in the book of Colossians. Paul starts talking about the way that there's a spiritual circumcision today. And it's really a beautiful metaphor when you think about it, because he's saying Jesus is the thing that cuts away all the dead parts from your heart, and then he binds you all together in him. And it's amazing imagery. And so from all the big things in life to the little tiny things, to your work, your family, your friendships, your faith, Paul is showing you how Jesus is everything. He is the all in all. It's all based on him. And so what he does, though, here is very interesting. He takes something that would be basic for us, something that we might take for granted, such as clothes. Every single one of us has a wardrobe. Every single one of us came here properly dressed tonight. And so we might take clothes for granted. And so maybe this gets lost a little bit on us as we start looking at this. But for the first century church, not everybody was properly clothed. Not everybody owned a wardrobe. And so this would have had a greater impact. How valuable clothes would have been. How a nice wardrobe would have really made you stand out in society and in public. And Paul's saying Jesus gives you a specific set of clothes that when you wear them, make you unlike anybody else. And when we all wear them together, and when we're all united together as the church, we can be exactly what he needs us to be. So our text tonight then is Colossians 3:12 through 14. And it says, "Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other, as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony." Now, you'll notice that this text very closely mirrors Galatians 5:19 through 23, which reads, "Now the works of the flesh are evident: sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of angers, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, and I warned you as before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such there is no law." Now, the biggest difference between these two, this is essentially the same list. Take off these things, put on these things. But he's using two different illustrations here. Here he's using fruit, trees, cultivating, farming, and people would have understood that. Now, in Colossians, he's talking about clothes. There's certain clothes you need to get rid of and take off, and there's certain things you need to put on. So it's the same attributes, it's the same qualities, really. It's just he's using a different illustration. Clothing has played a major role in nearly all societies across the globe. And I say that because I knew a missionary who did some mission work in a place where they didn't want to wear specific clothing. And so they're like, "Oh man, what do we do? This is making some of our missionaries uncomfortable." So they said, we have shirts. Let's give them shirts. And the men will wear the shirts and the women will wear the shirts. But when they gave them the shirts, they cut the shirts up so they could still have certain things exposed. And they said, "We don't know what to do at this point." But nearly all societies across the globe, and from all periods of time, wore clothes. And this goes all the way back to the time when Adam and Eve visited a certain fig tree after eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, I saw I listened to a lesson in preparation for this where the preacher was talking about how he said, really, if you think about it, he said Adam and Eve, this was really the first time that they had gone to a store and they picked out the fall collection. And every single person, I think you heard somebody cough in the back. You could have heard a pin drop, and he's like, okay. So I wanted to bring it up because it was painfully hilarious. But in every American family, a significant chunk of our budget goes to purchasing clothes. I mean, that's the truth for all of us. Every single one of us, especially if you've had kids or grandkids, you know how fast they grow. You know how clothes wear out. You know how fashions change. You can't keep wearing your winter coat during the summer. You've got to have summer clothes and winter. So we all spend a significant chunk of our budget on clothes. Now, the average American family as of 2022, and I think this is really more focused on 2021's numbers because we're not done with 2022 yet, but the average American family of four will spend $1,800 a year on clothing. on clothing. That is just insane. Do you know how many tacos you could buy with $1,800? I mean, to me, it's wasteful, honestly. But that's besides the point. Now, what's the most stressful thing people typically deal with every single day, right? The one question we all deal with is, what am I going to wear? You know, we go to a funeral, we got to wear something. We go to a wedding, we got to wear something. We go to work, we got to wear something. If we're going to sit out and lounge and eat breakfast on our back porch, we got to wear something, right? We've got to wear, and we're always trying to figure out, what are we going to wear and what are we going to put on and where are we going to get it from? Did you know that 41% of Americans, based on this, say that they need new clothes? And 2022 in-store clothing purchases are up over 2021 by 22%. Now, again, this year is not even over yet. And it's also interesting given that how high inflation is getting and how high prices are going up. And I think what's really going on here is I think now that COVID's over, people are just sick and tired of Zoom meeting in their PJs. What's that?
Yes.
That's true, because you would have to buy clothes for the weight gain.
Not the money.
Yeah. I have experienced such inflation. But yeah, I mean, so there's all these factors that go into it. We buy clothes. We buy lots of clothes. Studies have found that new clothes make people feel better about themselves. There's psychological advantages to this. They instill confidence. They give off the perception of success, and they improve performance of daily tasks. Now, clothes are the one thing that is both a give and a take. They say something to the person around you, and they also make you feel a certain way. And you've heard the saying, clothes make the man. And in most cases, that's particularly true. This poor guy, maybe not so much. But the idea that's conveyed and given off is that your clothes make a statement, right? You look a certain way to convey, you know, I have a job, or I have a car, or I have power, or this or that. And you know, the clothes are supposed to make the statement. Now, you'll notice that there are no women in these pictures. That's because you have no idea how awkward my search history already is just to get these pictures. I had to type in good-looking, well-dressed men. And I got to thinking about it, and I was like, I don't know how I can justify doing the other one. So, you know, men is what we get. Okay, but the idea, clothes make the man, right? They help define who we are. Mark Twain actually coined the phrase, clothes make the man. But did you know the full quote is, clothes make the man because naked people have little or no influence in society? I mean, it's true. I mean, it's absolutely true. Seems like common sense to me. I'm sure it seems like common sense to you. But I mean, this is absolutely true. And so when it comes to the Bible, and the Bible starts speaking about clothes, I mean, there's various things that the Bible talks about with clothes. Some of them in terms of like, don't dress yourself too haughty. Don't try to bring unnecessary attention to yourself with your clothes or your hair. Different things like that. But there's three different ways that the Bible does what is happening here in Colossians 3:12. The first way is in Isaiah 61:10, when it talks about the garment of salvation and the robe of righteousness. And our application today is that when we come to Christ, we are given the garment of salvation, and he puts the robe of righteousness on him because it's his robe and it's his righteousness, and he gives it to you freely. We see in Ephesians 6:10 through 20 talking about the whole armor of God, the breastplate of righteousness, the shield of faith, the outfit that we need for battle, for war, to be able to stand up against the devil, to be able to stand up against temptation, to be able to stand up for Christ. And then there's our day-to-day garments. These are the clothes that we put on every single day, the things that we're supposed to have on us at all times. Colossians 3:12 through 14. So these are the three different types of spiritual clothing that we see the Bible talking about. Now, Colossians 3:12 through 14 is continuing its theme of changing the garments. And from 3:5 through 11, it talks about taking off old, tattered, worthless, insufficient, torn garments, sets of clothes that are no longer going to do us any good. And if you've ever seen somebody, okay, I'm going to tell myself. When I was in college, I had a shirt. And I said a shirt. And I had just gotten married. And it was my shirt going all the way back to the 6th and Washington Street Church of Christ in Marietta when we had church league basketball. And I loved this shirt. And I wore this shirt until it started getting holes in it. And one day my wife threw it away. And I said, why in the world would you throw out my shirt? She said, because it's disgusting. She said, it's a beautiful memory you have. It was great, but it's time for that thing to go. And at some point, there comes a place where it's just time to take certain things off. It's over. You can't stay in your Halloween costume all year. You just can't do it. It's time to remove that and put the thing on that you need. And so when you look at Colossians 3, 8 through 10, this is what Paul is talking about. He says, but now you must put them all away. And I love that imagery. Put them away. We put clothes away. We're supposed to fold them, right? And we're supposed to put them in our drawers. Many of us take them and we just shove them wherever they can go. Maybe you guys don't do that, but I've gotten away with it from time to time when I'm really busy. But he says, put them all away, or other versions say, put them off. And these are the things we're supposed to put off: anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self. We're taking something off, we're putting something new on. See, Paul is setting this up beautifully. And so this is something that I think would qualify as it's time to go. Mine wasn't that bad, but it's...
There's clothes all over the mall that looks just like that.
Oh, yeah. It's funny you should mention that. I got something for you. So this is our life before Christ. I'm really glad you said that. This is our life before Christ. Now, ironically enough, this is how high fashion is considered to be. Did you know a couple years ago, Starbucks sold a shirt that was torn and it had a coffee ring stain right there? You know it was $183 for that shirt? Yeah. Why in the world would you do that? I mean, do you have money to burn? I mean, maybe some people do, but yeah, I mean, you'll pay $200 for a shirt like this at one of these pretentious high-end stores, right? Just because, hey, why not? I've got money to burn. I don't have money to burn, but some people do, I guess. Now, this garment represents the old person, right? The sinful way of life, the old way of life. And what we're seeing here is to put off the old person is to take off the dirty garment that's mentioned by Paul. It's to take off that layer of clothing. Now, as a side note, do you know what the 5 dirtiest jobs in America are? I combined 2 of them here, but research shows that the 5 dirtiest, nastiest, even in some cases dangerous jobs in America are these: meat packers. There's blood and fluids and bacteria. I won't go too deep into this because this is gross. Sewage, septic, wastewater. There's raw sewage, dangerous bacteria, harmful chemicals. There's trash and garbage removal. This is the second dirtiest job in America. I mean, because you're picking up all the stuff that people want to throw out. And coal miners, you're in dark, cramped spaces, breathing in coal dust, and you're susceptible to asthma and emphysema and things like that. So you can probably imagine that at the end of the day, these would be clothes that should probably come off.
Being a fireman, we do all those.
All those things, yeah, okay.
That is my day at work.
So I should have added firemen on there. Okay, next time I'll have firemen on there. Yeah, absolutely. Now, doing any of these jobs is going to require you to change your clothes at the end of the day. And in like manner, when you come to Christ, it's time to take off certain behaviors, certain patterns, certain habits, and put those things aside. You don't need them anymore. They're not useful to you anymore because those are part of your old wardrobe. So instead, you need to be outfitted with a behavior pattern that's befitting of your calling. If you belong to Christ, you need to look like Christ. So the first thing we need to do is we need to take off the old clothes, the dirty, tattered clothes. Now, you would never, ever, ever put on clean clothes over your dirty, tattered old clothes. We just don't do that, right? That doesn't make any sense. It would give you the same feeling of washing your dog and then watching them run right out into the yard and dive into the mud puddle, right? You're just like, you can't believe you did that. It's the same thing. You would never do that. Although in the Bible, there are some people who try to do this, and they're called wolves in sheep's clothing. They try to put on a certain facade over top of who they are really. And Jesus talks about that. And that's dangerous. But you know what's also dangerous, biblically speaking, are sheep and wolves clothing. Sheep and wolves clothing. These are people who want to hold the former manner of life they once lived, but also act like a Christian when it behooves them. And you have a biblical example of this in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. With the man who was in the church who was sleeping with his father's wife. And you have Paul who's saying, this is to your shame. He says, do you have any idea how bad this is? He said, the pagans that live around you in the city of Corinth would look at what he's doing and they would think that's gross. They would think that's really bad. And so the problem with this guy is that he was living a certain way, but yet he was still coming to services on Sunday and passing out communion. And so it was a problem. And Paul says, you have to stop this. We have to take care of it. And it's not enough just to take off the old clothes or to get rid of our sins. We're told that we have to put things on as well. And that's the key emphasis. You could say, well, you know what? I stopped cussing. I stopped drinking excessively. I stopped stealing. I don't do that anymore. I stopped the obscene hand gestures in traffic. I said this one time, and I had a wife go like this to her husband. Like, and that's like the moment you have to not make eye contact. So, I stopped having bad thoughts. I stopped, you fill in the blank, whatever it is. I stopped doing these things. And Paul is essentially telling us that our righteousness is defined by so much more than just the things we don't do that we don't do anymore. Yeah, there's things we have to stop doing. There's things that shouldn't be a part of our lives. But our Christianity doesn't stop there. Our faith doesn't stop there. But what we do now, we do through Christ. There's things we have to add. So we have to put on certain things. And not just any old things, we have to put on Christ. And therefore the attributes and the qualities that exhibit him in the world. And that's what Paul is building towards. That's what that's the statement he's trying to make. That's the point he's trying to get at. He's saying there's a manner of life which you as a Christian are no longer a part of. You no longer do. You no longer have anything to do with. And now that you are a Christian, you have to start putting these things on. And these things have to start becoming a part of who you are day to day. Now, is it going to be easy? Well, no, because let's face it, habits are hard to break. Is it you look at somebody who becomes a Christian and to pull them up out of the waters of baptism and then say, now by tomorrow you better have it all worked out. I mean, that's impossible. It's never going to happen. It takes time. It takes faith. It takes prayer. It takes building up. It takes edification. And I think I've made this point before with the fruit of the Spirit, but you wouldn't plant corn and then the next day come outside and expect a full stalk of corn with perfect ears of corn on it. It takes time and tender care and work to get there. It's the same thing with this. So spiritual fashion tips then that Paul gives us from Colossians 3:12 through 14 is that we have to pick the right wardrobe, and Paul is going to take us shopping for that. So guess what? You get to go shopping with Paul. Yeah? That one did not land the way I thought it would. All right, so.
No, we were ready to go.
Oh, all right. Well, hey, let's go. One of you guys will have to drive. Put on then as God's chosen ones, God's elect, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. So when it says God's elect, understand God calls us all. And so everyone who obeys are God's chosen and God's elect. So Paul is saying, since God picked you, dress like it, act like it. Put on these 5 garments that are a part of your spiritual wardrobe. Now, it's election season, so I got to say, I put in an illustration. When a person is elected president, there's a certain way that they're expected to dress, right? You're not going to get sworn in on the steps of the Capitol building or deliver a speech to the UN Security Council wearing sweatpants. Not going to happen. Now, without going on one side of the aisle or another, this illustration just doesn't land the same way these days anymore. So let me try to find an illustration that I think might work a little bit better. How about sports? Okay. Imagine that you've been drafted by a sports team, and we'll say Pittsburgh. That was supposed to be the Cleveland Browns, because I know that there's Steelers fans in this congregation. That's weird. I know that there's Steelers fans in the congregation, and I'm one of them, but I know there's more Browns fans. I don't know why that happened. Let me fix that real quick. I'm very sorry about that. Okay. All right. So let's say that you're drafted by the Cleveland Browns. And as you've been drafted by the Cleveland Browns.
Go with that.
Oh, no, not again. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know why this is happening. Oh, no, please, no. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on. Oh, no, enough.
That's okay.
That's the Browns.
What? Just one moment, please. Just a minute. Okay, so you've been drafted by the Browns, right? And when you're drafted by the Cleveland Browns, you're expected to wear the uniform during the games. You're expected to wear the uniform at practice. You're expected to look the part and dress a certain way. You couldn't just show up to a football game without the right gear and without the right equipment and without the right clothes. They wouldn't let you play. And in like manner, we're to put on these 5 pieces of clothing, these 5 articles that are indicative of Christians. And so we'll talk about those 5 pieces of clothing. And the first one is tender mercies, which is what the New King James says. The King James says bowels of mercy, or the ESV just simply says compassion. And if you've ever wondered why the King James says bowels of mercy, this is a very literal translation from the King James, and it's actually a pretty accurate one too, because in ancient times, people believed that your deepest emotions were found in the pit of your stomach, your gut, right? And you still hear people say things like this today. I have a gut feeling about this.
Exactly.
Right. Or I know this is going to happen, I can feel it in my gut. Or I have butterflies in my stomach because I'm nervous about this. Or my spidey senses are tingling. Whatever it might be. We feel it in our guts. And so to have compassion and to be sensitive to those who are in need, both physically and spiritually, is actually what Paul's talking about. And so this is a perfectly parallel description of Jesus in the New Testament. Because if you look at Matthew 9:35 through 36, it says, Jesus went through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and affliction. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Now, Jesus was moved for them because he looked at them like sheep who didn't have a shepherd, and Jesus wanted to fill that need, because we all know that sheep without a shepherd are lost. If you've ever seen sheep that are just left to their own wills and ways, they're scattered. One of them gets up on top of a rock, and you're like, how in the world did it get up there? It can't get down. How did it get up there in the first place? The other one's tangled up in the fence. The other one is eating stuff out of your garden. I mean, it's a mess. And Jesus says this is what Israel's like. So he has compassion on them. He feels for them spiritually. So when we put on tender mercies, what we're saying to people is, I don't want to hurt you. I don't want anything from you. You can trust me, and I want to help you because I care for you. And that's difficult for people, especially in today's day and age, because everybody's mean now, and everybody's harsh now, and everybody wants to judge everybody by all the things we can't do, by all our failures, by all our shortcomings, by all the things that we do wrong, and we have no mercy or grace for one another. And so tender mercies is this first garment, and it seems to be the one that Paul's saying, look, that's the one that's closest to your skin. Maybe that's the undergarments. He starts with this for a reason. This is one that we have to have first and foremost. Now, the second one is kindness. Now, this is related to tender mercies, but it means having a sweet disposition. And I know all of you. You all have sweet dispositions. You're all very kind. But thoughtful in interpersonal dealings. Did you know that this comes from the Greek word Christotes? And I like that word because it sounds like one of those like ads on TV. It's like, with once a day Christotes, you can lower your cholesterol. It sounds like a medicine. But did you know that one of the ways that this word was used is it was actually used in relationship to wine? And it was talking about how a wine with age would mellow. It's lost its harshness. It's lost its bite. And Paul's kind of taking this illustration. He's saying this needs to be you. As you're growing in Christ, you lose your harshness. You lose your bite. You lose your sharpness. You're softer. You're gentler. You're approachable. You're easier to deal with. One of the greatest examples of kindness in the Bible comes from the way that David treats Jonathan's son Mephibosheth. And if you know the story of Mephibosheth, you know the horrible situation that he was in. He was the grandson of Saul. And David and Saul were best buddies, right? They got along. There was never any problems, right? No, Saul hated David. Saul, and really all of the problems between Saul and David really kind of started going back to David and Goliath. When David slew Goliath and people started saying, hey, Saul slew his thousands and David his 10,000s, there started being jealousy. So later in life, Saul dies. Saul was, and before that, was very hostile towards David. But Saul and Jonathan are both dead. Now, David and Jonathan were best friends. They were probably the greatest example in the Bible of a true soul-bound friendship. And people want to say things about David and Jonathan like, well, they were homosexuals, and that's why. And none of that's going on. They are two best friends, and David and Jonathan are friends, but Jonathan is now gone too. And so Mephibosheth, who was crippled, is in a sense left on his own. And so David actually says out loud one day, is there anyone in the house of Saul that I can show kindness to? David is still wanting to extend this olive branch. He's wanting to mend things and patch things up. Even during Saul, when Saul was alive and David had a chance to kill him, he said, I can't do that. It's wrong. I can't take his life. So he says, is there anyone that I can show kindness to? And literally one of his servants says, Saul's grandson, Mephibosheth, is still alive, and tells David about him. He's crippled. He's alone. David says, bring him to me. Now, you have to understand Mephibosheth is probably scared, right? He's the last of a line of people that tried to kill David. They caused great trouble for him, and then David summons him. What can he do? He has no one to defend him, no one to support him, so he comes. And when he comes to him, It says in 2 Samuel 9, 5 through 7, then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ameliel, and Lodebar, and Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and paid homage. And David said to Mephibosheth and answered, behold, I am your servant. And David said to him, do not fear, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan, and I will restore to you all the land of Saul your father. You shall eat at my table always. This is a beautiful story of kindness, because I might, maybe this guy wants to kill me. But instead, David says, you don't have anything to be afraid of. I'm going to give you back everything that was Saul's. I'm going to do it in honor of your father Jonathan, and you have a place here in my house anytime you want. I mean, that's kindness. That's a beautiful story of kindness. And what Paul is saying is that that's a garment we need to wear, a garment that reaches out to people, that reaches through the harshness of what's going on in the world and gives this kind of thing to people, blows people away. I heard and I didn't write the name down, but somebody said this about kindness. They said, as the warm sun melts ice, kindness melts hostility. Kindness converts more people than zeal, smooth speech, or eloquence. Kindness is the language that the deaf can hear and the blind can see. And when you wear kindness as a garment, it makes a statement today because it is so rare. And that's the truth. You reach people with kindness. Because nobody out there cares how much you know about the Bible until they realize how much you care about them. And that's how you break through. That's how you get through to people. That's what Jesus did. That's what Paul did. That's what Paul's asking us to do. So the next garment is humility, or humbleness of mind, thinking rightly about yourself. I love the old cartoon of this little old farmer, and somebody says to him, you are the most humble person I have ever met in my life. And he says, oh, now, so I'm sure there's somebody out there way more humble than me. It just proves the point, right? But here's what's amazing. Did you realize that in classical Greek, there is no word for humility? Now, I'm not talking about Koine Greek because that's in the Bible, but in classical Greek, there was no word for humility. And when it did show up later in classical Greek literature, it was a derogatory term. And why was it derogatory? Because if you were humble, if you had humility, you were weak, right? The Greeks didn't see it as a virtue. They saw it as a vice, as a problem, a weakness. And so this wasn't something that you needed to have in your life, because what did the Greeks value? Well, the Greeks valued strength and success and domination. And do you realize it took Jesus Christ and the New Testament to come along and take something that was considered a weakness and turn it into a virtue? Christ did that. The Bible did that. To turn something that the world looked at as a weakness and turned it into a virtue, or a symbol of true strength. And Jesus himself made humility an attribute that we want to strive for. He said in Matthew 11, 28 through 30, come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. Kings all throughout the history of the world have a really bad habit of harshness. Right? You can't approach a king. You can't talk to a king like a friend or a family member. And here comes Jesus, who is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and he says, come to me because I'm gentle. Come to me because I love you. Come to me because I'll give you true rest. Come to me because I will relieve your burdens and I'll help you. That was unheard of. This flipped everything on its head. And Paul's saying this is something that we need to have as well. Humility doesn't mean that we mope around. We always say bad things about ourselves. We reject compliments. You ever met anybody that rejects compliments? Hey, that was a really good job you did. No, it wasn't. It's like, take the compliment, man. Come on, right? Humility is an accurate, clear estimation of yourself. It isn't that you think lowly of yourself, but rather you're not really thinking much of yourself at all. You're thinking of others. You're thinking of Christ. And humility is less of a feeling and more of a doing thing. It's something that I'm doing. It's a part of my life. And what I must do is I must think about who I am before Christ, the fact that I was lost, the fact that I was broken, the fact that his blood paid for my salvation, and I have to allow that to determine how I treat people and how I act towards people. So that's humility. Then there's meekness. Now, most people think of this as someone who is shy, docile, soft-spoken, weak in a sense. It's like, hey, how's it going? And you just curl up into a ball, right? spineless, fearful, cowardly, and this is obviously wrong. This isn't what meekness means at all. Meekness is actually strength that is controlled. You think of Superman, right? The way he could punch through a wall. Well, he wouldn't do that, because if he did, everybody in the building would die. He controlled that strength. That's meekness. Meekness is more accurately defined as power under control. And the Greeks would use this to speak about wind or tamed horses. Because a tamed horse is a powerful animal, but a tamed horse exhibits meekness in the fact that its power is controlled and directed. And so immense power under control. So meek people are powerful people under God's control. You look at Moses. Moses could lose his temper. He could get angry. But when he was controlled by God, think of the powerful force he was for good for God. Numbers 12:3, you have to see the irony in this. Numbers 12:3 says that Moses was the meekest man over all other men on earth. And the irony, of course, is that Moses wrote that. Now, Moses is inspired. So I believe that this is what the Bible says, and I believe it's true. But you can't help but see the irony in that. I'm the meekest person that ever lived because I said so. It's fun. Okay, long suffering. We're moving through these now. The long suffering comes from two Greek words. This is also in Paul's list in Galatians 5:22 through 23. It comes from two Greek words, macro, meaning large or great, and you see that applied today. We talk about macroeconomics or macro, different, all kinds of things with that. I had them in my head, and now they're gone. So macro meaning large or great, and thumia, which means heat, passion, or suffering. So literally, when you put the two together the way Paul uses it, it is long suffering, great suffering. It doesn't sound very good, does it? We need to be able to have long suffering. We need to be able to suffer greatly, in a sense. And he's not saying that this is what you should want to do, but there's an endurance aspect of it. If you've ever met anyone with a short temper, someone that it doesn't take much to get them fired up, one look, one word, one tweet, and bang, they're just mad, right? They're angry at the world. They're mad. They're going to yell at somebody. Long suffering, really, in the end, is to be long-tempered. It means that in life, we're going to have to endure hardships. We're going to have to endure tests. We're going to have to endure unpleasant situations. We're going to have to endure unpleasant people. We're going to have to endure things that we don't want to endure. And we don't get bitter. We don't lose our way. We don't quit. We suffer long, and we see it to the end. Remember, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13:4, love suffers long and is kind, being patient with people. We have to suffer along with people. And sometimes the people we have to suffer the longest with are the ones that are the closest to us. The people who can hurt us the most, the people who can cut us the deepest, the people who cause us to shed the biggest tears are the people that in our life that we love and we're close to. We have to be patient. And again, this is not something you just wake up one day and you're like, I've arrived, I got it. You're constantly working on this all throughout your life. You'll have hills and valleys and dips and pivots, and you'll be working on it until the day that you die. And Paul says this is a garment that we need to have on. So again, this doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong for a person to get angry, right? We have to get angry for the right reason. There's some things we should be angry about. If we see someone hurting a child, we should get angry about that. If we see somebody who's taking advantage of people, we should get angry about that. But we have to be angry for the right reason, at the right time, and with the right amount. And anything beyond that is where it gets dangerous. That's where we get into the territory of, you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to hit that guy with my car because he deserves it, right? We're taking things too far in that case. Maybe he does deserve it, but let God do it. Don't you do it. Right? This is God's spiritual wardrobe. All these things we're talking about, God's spiritual wardrobe, and it comprises a Christian's day-to-day clothes. And we're to use this thing to forgive one another, to treat one another well, and love one another, and keep in perfect harmony. And harmony is what we want. Fellowship is what we want. This helps us. This helps the world around us. Now, with that said, I want you to consider that this list that Paul has shared with the church in Colossae, this clothing item list that he's given them, I want you to consider that Jesus Christ has demonstrated every single one of these qualities to every single person. Think about it. Through the cross, he stripped off heaven. He stripped off safety. He stripped off security. He stripped off his place at the right hand of God the Father. And how do we know he did that? Because Philippians 2:5-11 says, though he was in the form of God, he did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, took it off, left it behind by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, even death on a cross. That's an amazing statement, and it goes in so perfectly with what we're talking about, because Jesus took off who he was so that he could put on who I am. He took off everything he was to put on everything I am, and what I am is lost and broken and sinful, and he put that on, and he did that, and he took it all the way to the cross with him, and he died in my place. That's what Paul's really getting at here. That's what Paul's really trying to show us here. We can do this because he did it. We can do it because he did it for us first. And we need to reach out and help others around and do the same thing. And this is what allows me to put off the old person and to put on the attributes or clothes that mirror him.